The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Today's world news, what it means, where it's taking us.
I bring you the one and only possible message of world peace.
This is a message of hope, tremendous hope. And he said unto me, you must prophesy again.
The Trumpet Daily program begins right now.
Yeah, I mean, uneasy, volatile, unsettling. You can pick whatever adjective you want, but here's what the numbers look like this past week, looking at the Dow average here with all of the news. You start last Monday, and look, you could see how the average just plummeted late Monday. That is when Trump made the announcement that the tariffs were coming. And take a look at this. Again, this is the Dow average. Between Election Day and Inauguration Day, it was up basically 4%. There was optimism on Wall Street about what Trump would do as president. But since Inauguration Day, it's been a very different reaction from Wall Street, down more than 1.5 points since Trump was inaugurated.
So the idea that American consumers are going to bear most of the tariff is just not economically literate.
Look, what I have to do is build a strong country. You can't really watch the stock market. If you look at China, they have a 100-year perspective. We have a quarter. We go by quarters.
That's true.
And you can't go by that. You have to do what's right. What we're doing is we're building a tremendous foundation for the future, tremendous foundation.
When exactly can Americans expect to see those prices come way down?
The deal starts April 2nd. The deal starts April 2nd of reciprocal tariffs. The president is going to negotiate country by country. He's going to drive down other countries' barriers. All of America is going to be winners because these prices are coming down, and the process starts April 2nd.
Oh, I think the tariffs are going to be the greatest thing we've ever done as a country.
The economy needs a pick-me-up, and tariffs are not a pick-me-up. What is the Trump tax cut. Congress has to get this passed as soon as possible by Memorial Day. That will provide the stimulus the economy needs.
The Trump slump has already begun, and it is not a natural slowdown in the business cycle. It is entirely because of Trump's destructive policies.
So if he's telegraphing this recession that he sees coming, I mean, Gene, how does he get around, despite telegraphing it and his people saying, oh, well, he told us it was going to happen, how does he get around being blamed for it?
He's also masterful at putting things on other people.
Look, I think this was the week, Christian, that Wall Street woke up. And Wall Street snapped out of its denialism. There was a sense, I think, among a lot of investors in the aftermath of the election, when they were riding the Trump bump, that we are back. We have a deregulatory, conservative, pro-market, pro-business president. That was fantasy. That is not Donald Trump.
They're destroying the economy, and they're making it harder and harder for Americans to afford things. That's where we need to keep the focus.
There's reckless change, and then there's responsible change. And the way that he's on again, off again, pounding Canada as if they're the exact same thing as China, it just creates this chaotic feeling.
Oh, it's unbelievably chaotic.
Should Americans brace for a recession?
Absolutely not. Anybody who bets against Donald Trump, it's like the same people who thought Donald Trump wasn't a winner a year ago. I would never bet on recession. No chance.
Well, I want a dynamic country where the private enterprise carries the day, not the government. We're doing great things in this country. This country's really got a chance to be pretty quickly great again.
A lot of mixed reviews on the economy over the weekend. A lot of back and forth about whether or not these are the right moves. I'm not an economist, but you look at the way those numbers were going towards the end of the Biden administration, and a lot of people were saying a reckoning is coming. It's going up really fast. It's going up really high. How long can this last? And that was in the midst of what many said was a recession. There's always this split between what just regular Americans feel, and then the stock market is this totally different world. There were years of inflation under Biden, crushing prices, but for a lot of companies, inflation can often be a good thing because it's higher prices. You see what people are willing to pay, and then when inflation actually comes down, well, is your price going to match? Because you now see what people are willing to pay for that. And then there's, of course, it's easy to create an artificial surge in the economy with printing money. the Infrastructure Reduction or Inflation Reduction Act, and all of the money that Biden spent. And like Trump says there, we look at everything in these 3-month increments, and if there's a bad week, suddenly it's the end of the world. Now, there is a massive reckoning happening right now. I mean, everything is in the red. People are panicking. They're saying it's totally because of the tariffs, and it is funny to watch. When the tariffs come in, you see the market go down, and then he lifts them, and then they pop right back up. Again, I'm not an economist. I don't know what the solution is to that problem, but Donald Trump's approach, what he says right there, is right. We want to build an economy that isn't based on government intervention. We want the market to determine it, and there's probably going to be some difficulty there. There's some adjustment. Maybe this is the end of the economy, or maybe an even bigger resurgence is coming. Mr. Fleury wrote in the latest Trumpet, or this is, I guess, this is the March 2025 Trumpet, Why God is Saving America Through Trump. And the cover of that says, the resurgence begins. So I don't know, maybe there is a lot more to come after this adjustment period. But what we know at the very end, though, is that this will not work out doing it man's way. Welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. I'm Sam Livingston. Thank you for joining us this Monday morning. If you have any comments for the show, you can send those to td@thetrumpet.com. Rumble over the weekend. The Trumpet Daily had a great weekend for the Friday show. That episode was titled, Germany Started 2 World Wars and Now Wants Nuclear Weapons. On our own channel, that had 115,000 views, and then on LFA, it had nearly 60,000. So I think that's our most viewed program on our channel so far this year. And it's a powerful title. Germany started 2 world wars and now wants nuclear weapons. There are a lot of people in the comments section that could do with just a review of some basic, simple history. I'm not even going to bother getting into it, but it is pretty stunning just what people will say. And a lot of people agree with it. And there is nuance in history, but there are also some pretty concrete, obvious things like Germany starting World War II. At any rate, the Key of David also over the weekend had its second highest response of the year. That was the first time our new book, The Psalter of Terra, was offered on the show. If you don't have a copy of this, you can call the number on your screen. You can request that for yourself. Hopefully we could, just from this show, even match the number of Key of David responses. Well, as I was putting this program together this morning, it's coming together, and there's a lot happening. I've been going through the autobiography of Mr. Armstrong, and I'm at the section where he's getting on to daily broadcasting. His travel schedule is very intense because he's got to travel to each radio station to do the program, and he's driving down the West Coast. And it's a rush. He would talk about how he checks the headlines just before he goes on the air and scribbles down as much as he can before he goes on there. And a lot of days, that's what this show feels like. It's happening so fast. When Mr. Armstrong was writing there, that was in the midst of World War II. And there's a lot of dramatic events obviously going on at that moment, but we have even more. It's a rush each day putting the show together. It's exciting. It's sobering. But as I was going through this, and like we heard in a message over the weekend here in Edmond, what are you doing in response to these events? How are you reacting to these dramatic events? I wanted to read the conclusion of Mr. Fleury's article in this Trumpet magazine, Why God is Saving America Through Trump, and just kind of use this to set the tone rather for the rest of this show. Mr. Fleury says, people really think they can somehow turn everything around, solve all the problems, and create a new golden age in America and the world. Yet the reality is that we are in the final days before the worst suffering on earth. People are going to come to see that they truly, deeply need God. I hope and pray they will come to recognize this soon, or else sadly most people will only be reached through indescribable suffering. This need not be the case for you. Listen to God's warning as He delivers it through His servants, the prophets. Use this resurgence, this calm before the storm, to repent and turn to Him. This is why God is so carefully orchestrating all these events. It is not merely to show his power, though it certainly does that. It is to draw people to repentance. Powerful, powerful conclusion to that show. It isn't about, or to that article, it's not about the resurgence. It's not about the stock market. It's not about buying the new home or getting lower interest rates. God is showing himself in these events. And you look at Europe, you look at Germany, I'll talk a lot about it later on in this show, and you see where God is working. As I was putting this show together, it's all constantly headlines and trumpet covers are popping into my head every day because of what we've written about at this website over the last 30 plus years. It was hard to put it together because, I got to find the link for that one. I remember that cover, and that's about this event. And we should all be having those moments. Go through, take some time, maybe this week. Go to the Trumpet website, and there's a tab when you go to the magazine, and it says Browse Past Issues. Scroll through that. Who is writing the headlines you're seeing right now in the 90s? And why are those being written? Because that's what Mr. Armstrong was talking about in the 30s, almost 100 years ago. It's been a consistent, constant message. You see where God is working, and then you've got to ask, well, what is he doing? Why is he doing this? Look how quickly and suddenly these events can happen. Look at the last week in Germany, like we heard about again over the weekend. Mr. Brad McDonald was talking about just how exciting the last week was in the course of world history. We'll definitely be looking back at that week. It was a turning point. And there's a lot to debate about, well, it needs to be done this way or they should do it this way, and you can become overwhelmed by getting into all of those little details, but look at the big picture. How urgent are you in responding to these headlines? Let it drive you in the right direction. Well, I wanted to touch on a bit of news before I get into Europe, just out of Canada. Canada held elections over the weekend. There's party elections to determine the new leader of the Liberal Party, who would then go on, I guess, to be the Prime Minister. I think they hold national elections in October of this year, but that the new Prime Minister of Canada, his name is Mark Carney. He won that election in a landslide. He was running against, what's her name again? She's the one that would stand behind Justin Trudeau and mouth all of the words that he was saying and make all of these funny movements. Definitely remember her from COVID. And the Christina Freeland. I don't know how I could forget Freeland. The opposite of Freeland is Chrystia Freeland. So she lost embarrassingly in that election. Carney won, and he's viewed as more of a moderate, and Trudeau is the radical. But as Mr. Palmer and Mr. Blondeau were saying this morning, in some ways this could be even worse than Trudeau. In their news email this morning, they talked about the rising anti-Americanism in Canada. And this is going to likely propel the Liberal Party to winning in those national elections later on this year. Carney, I don't know that he's got much of a history in politics. According to this article, he's been the head of the central bank in Canada, and this is pretty much, he's a new figure in politics there, and I think a lot of people view him as a moderate, but that subtlety can be even more dangerous because it can appear that way, but what they're doing is even more dangerous to the nation. You look at Canada's response. Of course, there's a lot of back and forth between the United States and Canada over these tariffs, but Canada's been suffering for well over a decade because of these radical left economic policies. We hear a lot about just how people are struggling to afford rent, afford groceries in Canada. Well, it's a very prosperous Western nation, but look at what these policies have done. And yes, the tariffs will make it worse. They'll make things harder, but was Canada on the right track? You look at the Conservative government up in Canada, or the Conservative Party, and they're against the tariffs, and they're standing up for their country as you'd expect. But in some ways, Donald Trump drawing attention to this. Donald Trump isn't attacking Canada. He's attacking that radical left party. If you're the conservatives, maybe that's a moment for you to say, he's throwing us a lifeline. Look at how bad things are up here. We've got to make radical changes in the other direction. Let's go to President Trump and use him as a strong ally. Instead, the conservatives, they're joining the Liberal Party in going after President Trump. I think because they believe they have to stand up to these tariffs, but perhaps they're missing a tremendous opportunity to get that liberal government out of control or out of power there. You see a lot of this hatred towards the United States. It's surfacing. It's there. It's been there for decades. The United States is, as soon as a country can't take advantage of America, as soon as they're off the welfare state, they just turn right against the United States. As soon as the U.S. says reciprocal tariffs, oh, well, yeah, Trump is Hitler. In 2020, Mr. Brad McDonald wrote an article at the Trumpet titled, "The Global Ambition to Destroy America and Its President." And there was this thing about, I think it was face masks, that he starts the article off with, and how just this seemingly minuscule little story, there was one fact reported on it wrong, and all of these countries jumped on the bandwagon of saying, well, this is America's fault. And it turned out to be totally false. But that hatred was there. And it bled out in that moment. And the world, that globalist policy that is anti-American. We see it bubbling over now. As soon as the United States says, well, we don't want to be taken advantage of anymore, it just flips just like that. Well, that's been simmering there for decades and decades. One thing that stood out to me over, well, the last week was how that Zelensky meeting with Trump, who could have seen that coming, that it would happen that way? But you look at how Germany reacted and you wonder, well, did they go into that and did Zelensky know, hey, this is how they want me to handle this? I don't know. It could go either way. To think that it was almost over in the last 10 minutes, he decides to start arguing in that way. Again, not a smart move diplomatically if you want that guarantee from the United States. But if you're Germany, you've got the pretext to rearm that you've always wanted. And then what struck me, though, was how right after that meeting, you hear all of these plans being leaked. This was Ambrose Evans Pritchard. I think we read this last week. European rearmament is going to turn the world upside down. It has taken 3 years, but Europe is at last putting its collective economy on industrial war footing. The sums of money are eye-watering. One leaked plan for German rearmament circulating in Berlin proposes a $400 billion blitz or euro blitz of extra spending on national defense. Then he says another leaked plan revealed by someone talks about turning Italy's struggling car industry into basically an arms and defense manufacturing industry. Well, did they write these plans right after Zelensky's meeting? Of course, the Russia-Ukraine war has been going for 3 years, so I don't think it would be that unusual for them to have these sorts of plans in the works, but maybe not. Maybe a lot of these were, well, we know America's breaking and we're waiting for that moment. And now we're going to leak all these plans. We're going to show the world what we have been wanting to do. That February 28th meeting, that was a massive turning point. It really could have just been an event that is quickly forgotten about and moved on from. But we saw something that has been decades in the making, this break between the United States and Germany. These clips that I want to play for you, they're from a French economist. I don't know how much he has to do with government policy, but some of what he's saying, it's shocking, but it really shouldn't be. If you've been reading the Trumpet for any amount of time at all, this is what we should be expecting out of Europe. And to hear these, but to hear this now in person or to hear it on the news, I mean, you've really got to ask questions. This is happening the way that Mr. Armstrong, the way that Mr. Fleury, the way that Bible prophecy said that it would. Notice this clip. This is, again, I forgot to note his name, but he's a French economist, and this was an interview from over the weekend. This is clip 5.
We have to try to be ready to have our own army, our own defense, our defense industry, not only army, our defense industry in order to be autonomous regarding the American defense industry, and to be ready to fight, hoping we will not have to fight two dictators, Americans and Russians. Because Trump is acting like Hitler in his country.
So for you, Trump is becoming a dictator. He's acting, you're saying, like Hitler.
Exactly.
It's indistinguishable from the radical left in the United States. But look at how the Europeans are talking. We're justified in doing this because Putin's a dictator and Trump is a dictator. We are now the center of freedom for the world. We have to rearm. We're fighting Hitler. That is the way that European politics, especially German politics, it's so manipulative. We're justified in doing it. And the radical left probably agrees with them. And the most shocking part, though, is that the Republicans in the United States are egging them on as well. Well, we don't care if you think that we're Hitler, but we want you to deal with your own problems. So nuke up. What a betrayal that is imminent. To hear the way that they talk about the United States. If you're President Trump, you have to listen to these politicians. Think about what they're saying about you. You really want them to become a superpower, to challenge Russia? This is another clip from that same economist. This is clip 6.
We are alone and we should be ready to be alone. But I think it's right. And it's, the main problem we face is the problem of timing. We have to be ready now. And what has been launched with the European Council and all that is the development of a European Defence Act. But it may take 5 years to be ready. And we don't have 5 years. We need to be ready now, and we need to be ready now. It means we have to put in place a war economy where we work on free shifts a day, 24 hours, 7 days a week, in order to reduce this timing. Because this is a race. It's a race.
It's stunning. Again, it shouldn't be, but you have to see that, and you have to respond to that. He's not the first European to say we need this, or that we need it now. But you look at the context of the events that are going on right now in which that's being said, and this is the real deal. This is happening. What did he say? 3 ships a week? We started watching a film about Churchill over the weekend. Mr. McDonald spoke about Churchill in one of his messages, and we were watching a movie about it. And Churchill, he's got, I'll talk about it a little bit later, he's got all of his workers, or these spies essentially, that are looking at the German Air Force and telling him this is how they're doing it. The British government, not only do they not care, but Stanley Baldwin says we're selling them the engines for their planes. And the rationale was, well, it's Germany's domestic policy. They're going to get the engines from somewhere, so we might as well be the ones selling them to them. That's Britain's silly dove politics. And now, Germany doesn't have to hide it. You don't need the spies to go looking around for it. It's in the headlines every day. We are doing this. And shockingly, America and Britain say, do it. We want more of it. A wartime economy. Again, thinking, like I said earlier, it's headline after headline at the Trumpet that you can go through. Mr. Palmer, in the May-June 2015, wrote an article titled Forged in Crisis. Germany creates these problems. They've done it with the euro. They create a problem, and then everyone begs for their help, and they come in as the hero, and they are essentially conquering territory. They did it in the Balkans, and that's what is another thing that's so astounding about Bible prophecy, Mr. Fleury writing about it all through the 90s, is these events have been occurring like that. You could say, well, it's been 30 years. It's been 30 years. When's it going to happen? This has been building. Mr. Armstrong wrote about how they learned the lessons from World War I and World War II. Forged in crises. These problems start, you could say, maybe even the immigration crisis in Germany. Turning everything over to the climate crisis. Well, we've got to have more wind turbines, and that is a predictable problem in the long run. And now their economy is struggling. Now they've got this immigration crisis. Now there's a war with Russia. And in the middle of that, the German industrialists and the government are signing energy deals with Russia, who's supposed to be the enemy. How many of these crises are of their own making so they could be justified to do this? And a lot of people in the comments will say, Germany didn't start World War I and World War II. We've got plenty of articles for you to show you that that is patently false. You read the comments of this video that from that French economist, and in the comments section, it's a lot of Germans and a lot of French saying, we're so happy France is standing up for us. Why were they ever an enemy? We've needed them. We're so proud of them that they actually kept up their nuclear program, that they have Airbus to build these planes so that we can have a European empire to counter the United States. And what articles come to mind at the Trumpet? What about France betrays America and Britain? What about that Key of David program? It's just article after article. And no one else talks about this. No one else has headlines like what we had on Friday. Not Democrats, not Republicans. Remember where you read it first. Remember where you heard it first. Notice this clip from this French economist. This is clip 7.
We don't have, we need a czar of the European defense, someone really in charge of it. With the countries that are interested, not everyone. It has to be very pragmatic.
It's a little difficult to understand, but he says we need a czar of European defense. We need someone that's really in charge of it. Not a German defense minister, of European defense. And then he says, with the countries that are interested, the EU is broken because they can't do anything because it just takes one vote from another member nation. He says, break it down to the countries that have the most interest, and let's have one person leading the defense. Do I have to quote all of the articles that we've written about that? It's almost like every second or third magazine, when you go through that list on the Trumpet website, the browse past issues, a German strongman is imminent. Is this the year Germany gets its strongman? And here are the Europeans talking about paring down, talking about getting a leader who can actually get something done, a pragmatic leader, getting rid of the countries that don't contribute as much. Maybe we just need 10. And we need a strong man over the head of it. And Bible prophecy says that leader is not going to come in democratically. That's the way the EU operates. I lived over there for a few years before Britain left the EU. You don't get to vote on a lot of things. Some faceless bureaucrat in Brussels decides, hey, your toaster's consuming too much electricity, get rid of it. All of these inconveniences to your life, you get no say in it. That's the way Europe operates. And then suddenly, there will be a strong man emerging who has a lot of power. Notice a few of these clips. This is from the Key of David. It hasn't aired yet, but it'll air next week. And Mr. Fleury recorded it last week. And notice some of these clips and what he's talking about. He's talking about a strong man in Germany rising. This is clip 11.
Daniel 11, verse 21 talks about, and in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. There's going to be a leader come on the scene very soon, and he's going to flatter the people. See, Germany's trying to figure out how they can get a strong man in Europe, and here's how. It's not by voting. They're going to make that choice without voting. Now, that's something that we ought to be concerned about. You can see in Habakkuk 1 where it talks about the Chaldeans rising up. That's just the German-led Holy Roman Empire. And verse 11 talks about, then shall his mind change, and he shall pass over and offend, imputing this his power unto his God. He becomes Satan-possessed. That's what that means. Habakkuk 1 and verse 11. Daniel 8 and verse 23 talks about a king of fierce countenance is coming on the scene, and he's going to be that strong man. But look what is going to happen here. And he has dark sentences and shall stand up. In verse 24, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Whose power? Satan's power. This man is going to be possessed. And we need to be concerned about that, because that means some serious trouble.
We have to face reality. And there, what you see, that's a watchman work. That is a watchman proclaiming this warning. Isaiah talks about how the watchmen, they're like sleeping dogs. They're not barking at this threat. Churchill was that way in 1930s in England. And who's barking now, though? Who is warning now? You don't hear it in the United States except from this one outlet, except from the Trumpet, except from Mr. Gerald Fleury, who's been warning about it for decades. We played those clips a few weeks ago from programs in 1993 with that same message. This article, it's from GermanForeignPolicy.com. It's titled, "We Are a World Power," and it's quoting, I think it was the Polish Prime Minister a few years ago, where he said, Europe is a world power. We just need to have the courage to embrace it. And this article, it's not endorsing Germany taking over, but it lays out a lot of the things that they're using and doing to achieve this, to become a world power. It says, sorry, it's translated from Google. It popped up, this article was posted today. So I was getting it quickly. Like I mentioned with Mr. Armstrong, it's happening right up to the last minute. So forgive me if this is a little quirky in the wording. They write, the steps are aimed at realizing an old goal of German foreign policy, namely to reach on an equal footing with the USA with the help of the EU. So the goal is to make a European superpower that is at equal, if not stronger, than the United States. The article talks about how the Bundestag is voting to get rid of the debt limits on military spending, saying that militarization has precedence over democracy, basically. This is more important than the democratic process. This has to happen fast. That's happening with the military spending. I don't know all the legality of it, but I don't know, is that something that has to go to a vote of the people? Well, I guess if their parliament is doing it, then that would be fine. But you see the steps being laid there for a strong man to come in. This is more important than democracy. German Foreign Policy says, on Friday, the chairman of Airbus's Airbus Defense and Space Division joined the demand for more militarization. If you spend the hundreds of billions of euros on off-the-shelf products in the USA that have been decided upon, we will cement our dependence on others. And he talks about these F-35s where there's a kill switch. They're from the United States. They can turn them off. And shockingly, the head of Airbus's defense industry or company says, well, he gave the scenario of if we have to defend Greenland from the United States, we don't want our equipment to be shut off by America. That is a scenario they're throwing out. War with the United States. Then they quote quite a few of these Europeans who have wanted European unity so that they could build this military. They write, with the entry into the forced militarization of Europe and the concentrated focus of its foreign activities on the even more immediate enforcement of German interests, Berlin is attempting to realize an old goal of the German elites, namely to reach on an equal footing with the United States. As early as 1966, the CSU politician and former federal minister of defense Franz Joseph Strauss spoke out in favor of the united Europe, should in the future take the position of an independent power between the United States and the then Soviet Union. In 2003, the former advisor to former Chancellor Helmut Kohl, I can't pronounce his name, judged in an article in the Springer newspaper Die Welt that the EU has a power potential that could define the status of a world power. In important areas, it is even superior to the United States. Integrated Europe, he wrote, is a world power in the making. German world power plans have been repeatedly addressed, and then they quote, I think it was Donald Tusk again, saying, "We are a world power if we just have the courage to do it." And then think about where you have heard this. Here's another clip from Mr. Fleury's upcoming Key of David program, clip 12.
Now, if you look at Germany going to Syria, they've allied themselves already with Germany, not Iran anymore, and they had a naval base and an air base where Russia and Iran had a place in the Mediterranean Sea. But now they've been driven out, and that gives Germany a lot more power just by aligning themselves with Syria, who had those bases in the Mediterranean Sea. Russia, of course, they have a naval and an air force base, and they have a lot of power, but they had to lose that space in the Mediterranean Sea, and mainly because of what Germany has done. And I'm telling you something, that the Mediterranean is now a European sea led by Germany. Germany, who has led us to 2 world wars, and we let them just have their way as if we didn't understand history. It's amazing.
Just a simple understanding of history. Hitler went into North Africa, and like Mr. Fleury says in that show, that they're a lot more strategic about it now. They're looking at it, where did we lose? Where did we go wrong? And it's taking time. It's slower, but not only is it slower, but what's fascinating is watching the rest of the world tell them to do it, basically, to watch it happen. We played the program about Germany's conquest of the Balkans. You look at Slovenia and Croatia, they're singing Danke Deutschland. It was NATO that went in there and cleared that out for them, but they all knew it was Germany pushing NATO to do it. The United States didn't want to do it, but they did it for Germany. Mr. Fleury's talked about the betrayal coming. But now it's Malta, Cyprus. You look at the Euro crisis and how Germany gained control of those places. You look at Syria now. I mean, that's stunning fulfilled prophecy like we've talked about a few months ago. They were in the camp of Iran and Russia, and now they're gone. And there's this critical port there on their coastline that Germany wants to come in and take, and to secure the underbelly of Europe. Notice one more clip from that Key of David, clip 13.
But what is Germany's plan? Well, what does it all mean? I mean, this really is in their own words, a planning to take over the world. When you have so many powers that have all these nuclear bombs, what is this going to do to this world? If that isn't stopped, and it isn't about to stop, because the Bible prophecy says so. And we have been telling you for so many years, people should be asking Germany, well, why are you so interested in the Mediterranean Sea and the Middle East and the whole world?
React to that watchman warning. You're not hearing it anywhere else. You didn't hear it anywhere else in the 90s and the mid-2000s, and now you're seeing those headlines that we wrote, that Mr. Fleury wrote. They're the reality that we're facing. Germany's soon-to-be Chancellor Friedrich Merz said on Sunday that sharing nuclear weapons is an issue that we need to talk about. We have become stronger together in nuclear deterrence. We should talk with both countries, France and Britain, always also from the perspective of supplementing the American nuclear shield, which we, of course, want to see maintained. Now, they're being sly there. Germany has these nuclear weapons. They have America's nuclear weapons. They want their own. And these are really stunning headlines. Mr. Stephen Fleury went through that Wall Street Journal article last week talking about Trump becoming the enemy and Germany goes nuclear. And I thought, this is going to be everywhere. It's not on Drudge. It's not on Citizen Free Press. It's not on Fox News. Like the headline on Friday's show, Germany started 2 world wars and now wants nuclear weapons. That's Isaiah 56 and verse 10. His watchmen are blind. They are all ignorant. They are all dumb dogs. They cannot bark. Sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Churchill faced that. You're looking at it now. There's one person sounding the alarm in this nation. And everyone else is saying, we want Germany to rearm. Another article, this is from Eurointelligence, talks about how the United States is not allowing these F-16s that they gave Ukraine through, I think, Denmark, to have some of these upgrades that they need. So now Germany is looking at that and saying, well, we bought all these F-35s, and then you're telling us that they're inoperable if the United States doesn't want to give us an update. I mean, that's how technology is now. It happens all the time with computers and phones. Okay, it works great for 3 years. Now you need this upgrade that you don't have, so you got to buy a new one. And the Germans are saying, we need our own. We need absolute power over our own technology. And the French are saying it. I quoted from that CEO of Airbus. This Eurointelligence article says, this weekend there was also a panic in the German media about the country's American-made F-35 fighter jets having a so-called kill switch built in. So now they're talking about looking to Airbus and this other company, French Dassault Mirage, I think that's the name of their fighter jets, and using those instead. It says it's hard to imagine a better advertisement for the French aerospace group, which plans to massively increase its production of its latest jet. This is out in the open. I mentioned how Churchill, he had to have these intelligence officials sneaking him files. And he was keeping a close eye on the German Air Force. But here we have Airbus, Germany. We have the United States egging them on. We know that it's happening. The Germans in World War II, they decentralized manufacturing, so it didn't look like it was a big deal. They'd have a plant in this part of the country building these parts. Oh, it's for domestic or commercial aircraft. It's not a big deal. And then all of these parts would come to these central locations, and fighter aircraft are being produced. It is very secret, but now it's being done out in the open. With silly dove, America and Britain, encouraging them on, thinking they're our ally, they're our lover, they wouldn't betray us, despite the way these politicians are talking. This is one more clip from Mr. Fleury's Key of David, clip 14.
Watch the Mediterranean. I'm telling you, this is all going to escalate into a World War III with nuclear bombs flying all over the place. What is it that we need to do? Well, you see, there's no way we can possibly control this. Once it's started, nobody's going to stop it. That terrible nuclear war, Matthew 24 and verse 21 says, there wouldn't be any flesh saved alive unless God himself returned and stopped it. There would be no flesh saved alive. Matthew 24, verse 21.
We have to be familiar with the Bible. We have to be familiar with those prophecies. And let that give you intense urgency for the moment that we are living in. These aren't problems that human beings can solve. And it gets so out of hand that, like it says there in Matthew 24, if Christ doesn't return No flesh is saved alive. It's not this city is destroyed or this one nation goes into captivity. It's no flesh saved alive. Well, that Matthew 24, that dates when that prophecy is for, as we'll cover in just a minute. There weren't these weapons of mass destruction in the first century. There weren't weapons of mass destruction in the 19th century. The 20th century, Mr. Armstrong in the 1930s and 40s said, this is it. Now these weapons are here. And that's what proves that this is not just another war. And skeptics will say, well, it's just a cycle of history. Men enter into war, and we have weak men right now. There's that meme that goes around. It's like weak men make hard times. Hard times make strong men. What is it? I don't remember how the rest of it goes. Strong men bring prosperity, and then prosperity makes weak men, and then it keeps going. It's not just part of that cycle. There are so many prophecies that date the events that we're in. Look at Revelation 17 and verse 10. Mr. Fleury says that is the key to understanding European history. These 7 resurrections of the Holy Roman Empire, and we're on the 7th. There's not another one after that. All of these prophecies are dated, and they're right at the very end. It's not just another war. This is talking about nuclear World War III. It's something that we have to be sobered by. These events, they're exciting because we know what it leads to, but we should be sobered and urgent about what God is trying to get us to do, how He's trying to get us to react. Like that quote I read from Mr. Fleury at the start. He wants repentance, and He's making it very clear how He's doing it. You look at this fulfilled Bible prophecy, it's clear God is organizing and overseeing all of this. I think Mr. Fleury, he spoke about those angels and those horses in Zechariah 6. You can read about it in the New Throne booklet. God oversees all of this. Notice this clip from President Trump's interview on Sunday with Maria Bartiromo. He's talking about a reality that a lot of people don't like to face, that a lot of people like to ignore. This is clip 8.
You said you wanted to do the Golden Dome. You've got a lot of ideas for America. But then earlier you said you wanted to cut $1 trillion in defense spending, right?
I didn't say I was.
You're not going to. So I was like, which is it? Are you cutting defense spending, or are you?
I said I was. I never said defense spending.
Okay, because I think you were talking about denuclearization,
Correct.
and that's where the cutting of the spending came in.
I never said cut. No, it's not in these days. I'd love to cut defense spending, but not now, because you have China, you have Russia, you have a lot of problems out there. No.
In fact,
what I have said is, we spend a lot of money on nuclear missiles, nuclear weapons. The level of destruction is beyond anything you can even imagine. It's just bad that everybody has to spend all this money on something that, if it's used, it's probably the end of the world.
Wow. I don't know what to say to that.
You know, when I listen to these climate lunatics and they talk about global warming, and they say the ocean's going to rise 1/8 of an inch in the next 300 years, and and nobody ever talks about nuclear weapons or some of the other things, but the nuclear weapons in particular right now. And they talk about the climate, and they talk about the dangers of the climate, but they don't talk about the dangers of a nuclear weapon, which could happen tomorrow.
It changes the calculation for a lot of things. When you have these weapons, I mean, they weren't around in the 1930s. There wasn't that aspect to dealing with Hitler. I mean, it does change the calculation a lot. But man cannot solve these problems. And once those weapons are made, once they're used, you can't stop it. Mr. Armstrong said there's a recess from the end of World War II. We're just in this short little recess, and it really is short in the grand scheme of things. And he said World War III is brewing. I was going back through the articles. I think he said that in 1946. They're planning for the next round. The next round, you're seeing it. You're seeing it happen. But those atomic weapons, it's proof that the existence of those, that this is not just another war, like we explained there in Matthew 24. You can look at our article titled, "Are We Living in the Last Days?" Another article, though, it was reprinted in a magazine that talks about a strong man rising in Europe. The cover of the Trumpet magazine that this article is in is titled, "Europe is About to be Hijacked. Who Will Rule Europe?" It just keeps coming from this magazine only. But this article, "Are We Living in the Last Days?" It says, at what specific point in time did Christ declare he would have to intervene and return to earth? Then he says it in verse 22. This article says, we need to understand the full import of this shocking scripture. The Moffat translation said, had not those days been cut short, not a soul would be saved alive. Another translation, yes, if those days had not been cut short, no human being would survive. It writes, let those words sink in. If Jesus Christ does not return to this earth, the time is soon coming when every last man, woman, and child will be exterminated. Here is man's most pressing problem today, the threat of human extinction, predicted almost 2,000 years ago. Christ's words could never have begun to be understood in correct context until the 20th century, when the atomic bomb, followed by the hydrogen bomb and other weapons of mass destruction, was invented. In fact, the meaning of many other end-time prophecies could not be understood until the end time. You can see that in Daniel 12. This is an irrefutable sign that we are in the last days. Never before has man had the capability to destroy every human being on earth. It's something that you need to stop and think about, pray about, meditate on. I went back to look at some of these articles right after World War II that Mr. Armstrong had written. This one is in 1954. He says, the whole world was stunned in 1945 when it was disclosed that one single bomb, an atomic bomb, had destroyed an entire city. And then later he says, but we are getting used to it. We are no longer shocked by such terrifying news. Another thing that just shows where God is working was Mr. Armstrong was warning about this, and everybody's afraid of nuclear war. And Mr. Armstrong says that nuclear war is coming, but it's not going to be Russia. He keeps saying that it's not going to be Russia. Bible prophecy says it's not Russia. And then look where we are today. He says it's Germany now asking for these nukes, wanting to build them. That's who he said to watch. And that again proves where we are in all of this. In 1950, Mr. Armstrong talked about how we were sleeping. The eternal God determines the outcome of wars, and God mercifully intervened and saved us from the defeat which might have come to us even while Patton's men were driving on toward Berlin. We are now allowed this recess before round 3 of the World War to allow time for the warning now going out on the World Tomorrow program over the air. And he again goes on and says, people have gotten dull. They're asleep to this. That Wall Street Journal article that Mr. Stephen Flurry went through on Friday, where was the alarm? Where else did you hear that dog howling, that alarm sound, that watchman work, that lion roaring work? I mean, to read a headline like that and to know what we know about what Mr. Armstrong said for all of those decades, that should rouse people. But instead, like it says in Ezekiel, like it says in Isaiah, they're sleeping dogs. How are you responding? Are you awake and alert? Are you watching intently? I forgot to bring the book, but I wanted to go through a bit of the book of Ezekiel. And we offer that book, call and get a free copy of it. It explains so much of these prophecies in detail. Of course, request he was right. I mean, all of these events, we're watching them because of what they lead to. It leads to the greatest news there could ever be. That is the return of Jesus Christ to this earth, to actually solve these problems that human beings cannot solve. That's the excitement in all of this. There's a lot of sobering news before we get there, but go through these booklets. Go through that Ezekiel Watchman book request. We've got booklets about all of this if you go through our library. Spend some time, again, looking at those old Trumpet magazines. Be motivated. Respond to these events. That is all that I have time for on today's show. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any comments, you can send those to td@thetrumpet.com. Mr. Stephen Flurry will be back with you on tomorrow's show. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy your day.